You think you know worship. You think you understand the weight of a god. We thought we did. I remember the sunlight on the marble. It felt like a promise. It felt eternal. We built a paradise for him here on Aurelia Secundus. We sang songs of joy, not war. We scrubbed the Gothic grit from our history and replaced it with silk and philosophy. We thought he was smiling down on us from the golden throne. That was our crime. Not the heresy of demons, but the heresy of hope. We forgot the one truth of the 41st millennium. The Emperor does not want your love, he wants your blood. And when the sky finally broke open, we learned that the hard way. Look at my hands. They used to hold quills. Now they shake. The Library of Light was the center of our world. It was not a fortress of void shields and adamantium, but a palace of glass and white stone. I remember the smell of it. It smelled of cured parchment lemon oil and the dust of 10,000 years of peace. It was a smell that promised safety. I sat at my desk, the mahogany smooth under my fingertips. The sun streamed through the prismatic windows, painting the floor in bands of violet and gold. It was quiet, a profound scholarly silence that we mistook for holiness. Outside, the artificial songbirds chirped their clockwork melodies. We had built them because real birds were too messy, too unpredictable. We liked things ordered. We liked things clean. I dipped my quill into the inkwell. The ink was a deep, rich gold suspended with traces of heavy metals to make it shine. Even our words had to glitter. I was writing the final entry of the Pax Aurelia. That was my life's work. It was a history of our sector, a testament to how we had evolved beyond the barbaric superstition of the wider galaxy. I wrote about our tithes paid not in conscripts, but in art and grain. I wrote about our governor, a man who walked without bodyguards, who preached that the Emperor's sword was metaphorical, a symbol of the mind, cutting through ignorance. I believed it. God, Emperor, forgive me. I believed it with every fiber of my being. I looked down at the words on the page. Prosperity is the truest form of devotion. The sentence looked perfect. The calligraphy was flawless. I felt a swell of pride in my chest, a warm, golden feeling that I told myself was faith. It was just arrogance. It was the vanity of a man who has never seen a bolter round liquefy a child. I stood up and walked to the balcony. The city of Primus lay spread out below me like a spilled jewelry box. There were no smog clouds choking the horizon, no hive spires clawing desperately at the atmosphere to escape the squalor below. Our towers were slender, wrapped in vertical gardens and banners of white silk that snapped lazily in the breeze. People moved through the plazas in robes of pastel colors. They didn't march. They strolled. I saw a group of children playing near the great fountain, splashing in water that was clear enough to drink. In other worlds, water is recycled from the dead. Here, we wasted it on play. I smiled at the sight. I thought we were the chosen ones. I thought Terra was the one that had lost its way, trapped in its grim obsession with skulls and death. We were the true keepers of the flame. We were civilized. The statue of the Emperor dominated the central square. It was not the warrior king you see in the ecclesiastical pamphlets. Our Emperor did not wear power armor. He wore a toga. He held a book in one hand and an olive branch in the other. His face was not twisted in a rictus of eternal hate, but soft, paternal forgiving. We had made God in our own image. We had neutered the master of mankind because the reality of him was too frightening to behold. I looked at that statue and felt a tear roll down my cheek. I whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for the silence," I said. "Thank you for the light." The wind carried my whisper away. It was a gentle wind. It didn't smell of promethium or cordite. It smelled of jasmine. It was a lie. The whole world was a lie constructed of glass and good intentions waiting for the first stone to be thrown. I returned to my desk. The Golden Age, that is what we called it. We truly believed we had solved the riddle of existence. We thought that if we were good, if we were productive, if we were loyal in our hearts, the galaxy would leave us alone. We thought our isolation was a blessing, not a blindfold. I picked up the quill again. I wanted to describe the quality of the light that afternoon. It was crucial that future generations understood how beautiful it was. I wrote about the warmth on my skin. I wrote about the lack of sirens. I wrote about the certainty that tomorrow would be exactly like today. I was so desperate to preserve the moment. I didn't know that I was writing an obituary. I didn't know that the ink I was using would soon be the only gold left on the planet. A servitor glided past my door. Even our servitors were aesthetic. Their lobotomized flesh was covered in porcelain masks, their mechanical limbs encased in polished brass. We hid the horror of their creation behind artistry. We didn't want to see the wires. We didn't want to see the meat. I nodded to it, a polite gesture to a machine. It hummed a soft, harmonious tone in response and continued polishing the already gleaming floor. We had sanitized everything. We had removed the grit, the struggle, the pain. We thought we had elevated humanity. But without pain, without the struggle, we had become soft. We were cattle. Fat, happy cattle grazing in a meadow, completely unaware of the slaughterhouse casting its shadow over the grass. I remember looking at my own reflection in the window. My face was unscarred. My skin was smooth, untouched by radiation or disease. I wore the robes of the archivist, heavy with embroidery. I looked like a prince. I felt important. I felt safe. That safety was the most dangerous drug of all. It intoxicated us. It made us sluggish. It made us deaf to the whispers in the void. I sat there for hours watching the sun begin to set. The sky turned a bruised purple, beautiful and vibrant. The first stars began to appear. I looked up at them and felt a kinship. We were one with the cosmos. We were part of the grand design. I didn't know that the stars were not watching us. They were ignoring us. Or worse, they were hungry. The sun dipped below the horizon. The streetlights flickered on, bathing the city in a soft amber glow. It was the time of evening prayer. But our prayer was not a chant of hatred against the Xenos. It was a meditation, a collective moment of mindfulness. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scented air. I felt a deep, abiding peace. I felt that nothing could ever hurt us. The Imperium was a distant concept, a benevolent father who protected us from the dark. We didn't know the father was insane. We didn't know the father ate his children to keep himself alive. I finished the page. I sanded the ink dry. I closed the heavy leather cover of the book. It is done, I thought. The history is complete. The silence of the library seemed to deepen. It wasn't the comfortable silence of before. It felt heavy, pressed, like the air before a thunderstorm. I dismissed the feeling. I told myself I was just tired. I told myself it was the melancholy of finishing a great work. I stood up to leave, to go home to my quarters, to drink wine, and sleep in a bed with silk sheets. I walked through the corridors of marble, my footsteps clicking softly. I passed the busts of past governors, men of reason and logic. They stared at me with stone eyes. I wonder now if they were judging me. I wonder if they knew what their legacy would result in. I walked out into the cool night air. The artificial birds had stopped singing. The city was quiet. Too quiet. I looked up at the sky one last time before entering my transport. The stars looked different. There was a cluster of new stars in the southern quadrant. Bright. Piercing. They hadn't been there yesterday. I frowned, my archivist's mind trying to categorize the anomaly. Perhaps a meteor shower, perhaps a nebular shift. Logic. Always logic. I didn't feel fear. I felt curiosity. I was a man of science and faith, and I believed there was an answer for everything. I watched the new stars twinkle. They were not twinkling. They were steady. They were growing. I got into the transport, and the door slid shut with a soft hiss. The luxury of the cabin cocooned me. I didn't look back at the sky. If I had looked longer, I might have seen that the stars were moving. I might have seen that they were not stars at all. The ride home was smooth. The suspension absorbed every imperfection in the road. I closed my eyes and dreamed of the ceremony the next day. I would present the book to the governor. There would be applause. There would be speeches about our eternal golden age. I was happy. I was a fool. That was the last night of the world, the last night of the dream. We slept in our beds wrapped in our ignorance, while the sky above us began to bleed. We were the faithful. We were the loyal. And we were already dead. The silence stayed with me as I drifted off to sleep. It wasn't mercy. It was the breath held before the scream. The first sign wasn't a scream. It was static. A low, persistent buzzing that seemed to itch behind the eyes. It started in the deep void listening posts, the silent sentinels we had placed in the asteroid belt to monitor trade routes. We didn't monitor for threats. We monitored for commerce. I was summoned to the Grand Observatory at dawn. The summons was polite, printed on cream-colored cardstock, but the courier's hand had been shaking. I remember walking into the strategy room. It was a circular chamber of polished obsidian and chrome, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive cologne. The council was already there. They looked annoyed, not afraid. They were men and women who debated tax brackets and zoning laws. They were not prepared for the silence that was swallowing our sky. The Voxmaster stood before the great hololith. He was a pale man, usually composed, but sweat was beading on his forehead. He tapped the console, and the room filled with the sound of the void. Usually, it was a rhythmic ping, a reassuring heartbeat of data. Now it was a white noise that sounded like dry leaves being crushed. "Station Ethelgard is not responding," he said. His voice was flat. "Station Beowulf is not responding. Station Grendel, gone." He didn't say destroyed. He couldn't bring himself to use a word that violent. He just said, gone, as if they had simply packed up and left. The governor sat in his high-backed chair, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup. He waved a hand dismissively. "Solar flares," the governor said. "Or perhaps a malfunction in the relay array. We must not jump to primitive conclusions." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that it was just a broken machine. I was a historian. I dealt in facts and records and things that could be cross-referenced and indexed. But the static on the hololith felt alive. It wasn't random. It had a texture. If you listened closely past the hiss and the pop of cosmic radiation, it sounded like breathing. Heavy, wet, mechanical breathing. I walked to the window. The sky was changing. The dawn usually brought a soft pink hue to the clouds above Primus. Today, the horizon was a bruised purple streaked with veins of sickly yellow. It looked like a hematoma spreading across the skin of the world. "The atmospheric processors must be adjusting," I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. I was using logic as a shield, but the shield was made of paper. By midday, the anomaly was visible to the naked eye. The new stars I had seen the night before were no longer stars. They were voids, black shapes against the sun growing larger with every passing hour. The council debated the nature of the visitors. The Minister of Culture suggested it was a diplomatic fleet from Terra, finally coming to honor our achievements. "They have heard of our piety," she insisted, adjusting her silk sash. "They come to learn from us, to see how a world can be both faithful and free." It was a seductive thought. We were so hungry for validation. We wanted the Imperium to look at us and say, "Yes, you did it right." We didn't understand that the Imperium doesn't learn. It dictates. It enforces. I tried to return to my work, but the library felt different. The silence was no longer scholarly. It was predatory. I found myself staring at a map of the sector, tracing the distance between us and the nearest warp jump point. It should have taken weeks for a fleet that size to arrive from the deep dark. They had appeared overnight. That defied physics. It defied the orderly laws we lived by. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I went to the restricted archives, pulling old texts about the Great Crusade books we usually kept locked away because the illustrations were too grotesque. I looked at the woodcuts of drop pods of orbital bombardments. I looked at the black shapes in the sky outside. The shapes matched. I closed the book. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself we were loyal. Why would they hurt the loyal? The first transmission came just before dusk. It wasn't directed at us. It was a broadcast on all frequencies, blasting through every Vox caster, every public screen, every personal data slate. It wasn't a message of greeting. It wasn't a request for landing coordinates. It was a sound, a single unified chant, distorted by the void, but unmistakable in its intent. Imperator vult, the Emperor wills. It was roared by thousands of voices, overlaid with the grinding of gears and the thumping of pistons. It was a sound of absolute fanatical violence. In the council chamber, the teacup rattled in its saucer. The governor stood up, his smile wavering, but fixed. "You see," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "They pray. They are brothers in faith. We will prepare a banquet." I looked out the window again. The sky was no longer purple. It was red, a deep arterial crimson that bathed the white city in the color of fresh meat. The clouds churned unnaturally, pushed aside by the sheer displacement of the ships, descending into low orbit. They were colossal. Cathedrals of iron and gunmetal bristling with macro cannons that were larger than our tallest towers. They hung there, defying gravity, blotting out the sun. The shadows they cast were cold and absolute. I saw the people in the square below stop. They looked up. Thousands of faces bathed in red light, filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. They pointed. They didn't run. They didn't know they were supposed to run. Why is the sky bleeding? The question came from a young aide, a girl no older than 20. She was staring at the monitor, tears streaming down her face. No one answered her. We were frozen. We were the intellectuals, the leaders, the masters of our domain, and we were paralyzed by the sheer scale of the reality intruding upon our dream. I looked at the lead ship. I could see the heraldry now magnified on the main screen. It wasn't the golden eagle of our statues. It was a skull. A white skull on a field of black, and below it crossed swords. I knew that symbol. I had read about it in the dusty tomes of forbidden wars. I knew what it meant, but I couldn't say the words. I couldn't shatter the fragility of the room. The governor ordered the planetary Vox to be opened. He cleared his throat. He intended to welcome them. He intended to invite them to the Grand Plaza for a discourse on theology. Citizens of the Imperium, he began, his voice amplified across the city. We welcome you to Aurelia Secundus. We embrace you in the light of the Golden Throne. His voice echoed off the hulls of the ships hanging above us. There was no answer, just the static. And then the static stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of a judge who has already signed the death warrant and sees no need to speak to the condemned. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles were white. I knew then that logic had failed us. Reason had failed us. The omen was not a warning. It was a target lock. We went to the plaza to greet them. The governor insisted. He wore his ceremonial sash, the white silk bright against the darkening sky. He told us to bring flowers. He told the orchestra to play the hymn of welcome. Thousands of people packed into the grand Unity Square, a sea of hopeful faces turned upwards. They held their children on their shoulders so they could see the angels descend. I stood on the dais, my heart hammering against my ribs. Part of me was terrified, but a larger part, the foolish part, still hoped. I wanted to see the legends come to life. I wanted to see the giants who guarded the stars. The clouds tore open, not with a fanfare of trumpets, but with the shriek of burning atmosphere. They didn't glide down. They fell. Meteors of black iron trailing fire and smoke aimed straight for the heart of our city. The impact shook the teeth in my skull. The first drop pod smashed into the central fountain, vaporizing the water instantly. Stone shattered. Shrapnel flew through the crowd like razor blades, but the people didn't run. They were too stunned. They thought this was part of the spectacle, a display of divine power. A woman near the front fell to her knees, her hands clasped in prayer, blood running from a cut on her forehead. She didn't wipe it away. She offered it up. More pods slammed into the plaza, cracking the pristine marble paving we had maintained for centuries. The heat rolling off them was intense, smelling of cooked metal and promethium. The music stopped. The only sound was the hissing of cooling vents and the heavy mechanical clank of locking bolts disengaging. The doors exploded outwards. Smoke billowed thick and acrid, and then they stepped out. They were not the golden statues of our dreams. They were monsters. 7 feet tall, encased in ceramite plate that was scarred and pitted from 1,000 wars. They were dirty. They were covered in soot oil and the dried filth of other worlds. Their helmets were skull masks, their eyes glowing with a hateful red light. They held weapons, bolters, that looked too large for any human to lift. The governor stepped forward, his arms wide, a smile of trembling ecstasy on his face. "Welcome," he cried out, his voice thin in the heavy air. "Welcome, brothers. We are your faithful servants. We are..." He never finished the sentence. The lead Marine didn't speak. He didn't acknowledge the greeting. He simply raised his bolter. The movement was fast, blurringly fast for something so large. There was no hesitation, no assessment of threat. The weapon kicked. A sound like a thunderclap split the air. The governor's head didn't just break, it vanished. One moment he was smiling, the next, there was only a fountain of red mist and bone fragments spraying over the white silk of his sash. His body stood for a second, confused by its own death, before crumpling to the dais. The crowd went silent, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the plaza. They didn't understand. They couldn't process it. Why would the angel kill the high priest? It must be a mistake. It must be a test. Then the firing line opened up. It wasn't a battle. A battle implies two sides fighting. This was an industrial process. The bolter rounds were explosive. They didn't just pierce flesh, they detonated inside it. I saw the front row of the crowd disintegrate. Bodies were blown apart, limbs, severed torsos reduced to wet ruin. The woman who had been praying, she was gone. Just a red smear on the cracked stone. The noise was deafening. It wasn't a continuous roar, but a rhythmic staccato hammering. Thud, thud, thud. Each thud was a life ended. The crowd screamed then, a sound of pure animal panic. They turned to run, climbing over each other, trampling the fallen. But there was nowhere to go. The pods had encircled the square. I stood frozen on the dais, covered in the blood of the man I had served for 20 years. I watched a Marine walk up the stairs towards me. The ground shook with his tread. He was a wall of black armor smelling of old blood and gun oil. He ignored me. He wasn't interested in a lone scholar. He walked past me, crushing the governor's corpse under his boot without even looking down. He was scanning the crowd, identifying clusters of people and firing into them with mechanical efficiency. I saw a father try to shield his daughter. The bolt round went through both of them. It didn't matter that they loved the Emperor. It didn't matter that they were good people. To the Space Marine, they were just biomass blocking a firing solution. The slaughter lasted for 20 minutes. I timed it. I don't know why. Maybe my mind needed to latch onto numbers to keep from snapping. 20 minutes to depopulate the square. The marble was no longer white. It was a lake of crimson, slick and viscous. The air was a pink mist of atomized blood that tasted of copper and salt. The Marines stopped firing only when nothing was left standing. They checked their weapons. They reloaded. They moved in perfect synchronization, a single organism of death. One of them turned his helmet towards the statue of the Peace Emperor in the center of the carnage. He revved a chainsword, a sound like a screaming engine, and with one swing, he severed the statue's legs. The stone god toppled, crashing face first into the gore of his worshippers. I sank to my knees. I didn't pray. I couldn't remember the words. The theology I had spent my life studying, the arguments about the nature of divinity, the beauty of our devotion, it was all ash. It meant nothing. We had worshipped a fantasy. This was the reality. The angels of death were not here to save us. They were here because we were different. And in the Imperium, being different is a capital crime. I looked at the Marine nearest to me. He was motionless, watching the smoke rise. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like an executioner who was bored with his work. The silence returned, but it was heavy now, wet and suffocating. It wasn't peace. It was just the pause before they moved to the next street. We retreated to the dark. The surviving members of the council, the high-ranking scholars, the wealthy merchants, we scuttled like beetles into the hardened bunkers beneath the frantic city. These shelters were designed to withstand atmospheric storms or tectonic shifts. They were luxurious, stocked with vintage amasec and soft bedding. They were not designed to withstand the wrath of the stars. The air inside was recycled stale and metallic, tasting of fear and expensive perfume. The ceiling shook rhythmically. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of our beautiful towers collapsing above us one by one. We sat around a polished table made of synthetic ivory, huddled together, pretending that we still had authority. Pretending that this was a diplomatic incident that could be resolved with the right paperwork. The Minister of Trade, a man who had spent his life negotiating grain tariffs, wiped sweat from his upper lip with a trembling handkerchief. He looked at me. His eyes were wide-rimmed with red. "Valerius," he said, "you know the high tongue. You know the scriptures. Write to them. Explain it to them." He pushed a data slate towards me. It slid across the table, stopping near my hands. My hands were still stained with the governor's blood. It had dried into a dark, flaky crust under my fingernails. "Tell them we love the Emperor," he pleaded. "Tell them our worship is pure. It's just a different dialect of faith. Tell them it's a misunderstanding." I looked at the blank screen. A misunderstanding, as if the massacre in the square was a clerical error. But I picked up the stylus. I did it because I was a coward. I did it because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that words still had power. That reason could stop a chainsword. I began to write. I summoned every ounce of my rhetorical skill. I quoted the Lectitio Divinitatis, or at least our version of it. I explained that our pacifism was a tribute to the Emperor's ultimate victory. I wrote that we didn't build weapons because we believed he had already won the war for us. I wrote about the beauty of our art, the purity of our philosophy. I constructed a cathedral of logic, brick by brick, word by word. It was the most beautiful lie I ever told. "We are his children." I typed, my fingers slipping on the glass. "We have kept the light burning in the darkness. We ask only for audience. We ask to be judged by our hearts, not by our lack of scars." I read it back. It sounded noble. It sounded civilized. I pressed the transmit key. The message flew up through the hardened cables, up through the burning ruins of the city, up to the iron monsters hanging in orbit. We waited. The silence in the bunker was agonizing. The lights flickered as the power grid above began to fail. I could hear the minister's breathing shallow and wet. I could hear the woman next to him praying softly to the Peace Emperor, clutching a jade amulet that was now nothing more than a stone. The response came 4 minutes later. It didn't come as a text. It came through the main Vox unit on the wall. The speakers crackled, popping with aggressive static. Then a voice filled the room. It was not human. It was a synthesized growl, deep and distorted, stripping away all empathy. It didn't address the minister. It didn't address me. It addressed the entire bunker. Rejection, the voice said. Just one word. Heavy. Final. Then a pause. "Your logic is the logic of the parasite. You claim to love the master of mankind, yet you reject his reality. You have created an idol of comfort to shield yourselves from the duty of agony." I stared at the speaker. The voice continued colder than the void itself. To worship the Emperor is to wage war. To reject war is to reject him. You do not worship the God Emperor. You worship your own reflection. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. They didn't care about our intentions. They didn't care that we were good people. In their eyes, our goodness was a sin because it made us weak. We had turned the master of mankind into a harmless grandfather so we could sleep at night. We had domesticated a tiger and were surprised when the wild pack came to tear us apart for the insult. The minister slammed his fist on the table. "They are mad," he screamed, his composure finally shattering. "We are civilized. We are the future." He grabbed the microphone. "We surrender." He shouted into it. "We surrender unconditionally. We will pay any tithe. We will serve." The voice from the orbit returned immediately. "There is no surrender for the tainted. The seed is rotten. The harvest must be burned. The connection cut." The static died. The room was plunged back into the shaking silence. The minister looked at me, his mouth open, but no sound came out. He looked like a child who had just been told that his parents were never coming home. I looked down at the data slate. My beautiful defense, my logical argument was still on the screen. I deleted it. It didn't matter. Logic is a luxury of the living. We were already ghosts. The shaking from the ceiling grew more violent. Dust began to rain down on the ivory table, coating our expensive clothes in a fine gray powder. It wasn't just bombardment anymore. It was precision drilling. They knew where we were. They weren't going to negotiate. They were going to dig us out. I closed my eyes and listened to the earth scream around us. I realized then that the pen is not mightier than the sword. The pen is just a stick you hold while the sword cuts your throat. The argument was over. The burning was about to begin. I don't know how I got out of the bunker. I remember the smell of cordite and the screams of the minister as the ceiling finally gave way. I remember crawling through a ventilation shaft that was slick with hydraulic fluid. But my feet took me to the only place that mattered. The Library of Light. I told myself I was going there to save the records. I told myself that if I could just hide the Codex of Peace, someone someday would know we weren't monsters. I ran through the burning streets. The air was thick with ash falling softly like gray snow. It coated my tongue. It tasted of charred wood and old paper. When I reached the library, the great glass dome was shattered. The sky above was a churning vortex of smoke, and inside the soldiers of the Imperium were already at work. They were not the giants in power armor. These were mortal men and women, the Imperial Guard. They wore drab, heavy coats and helmets that covered their eyes with dark lenses. They moved with the efficiency of ants, dismantling a carcass. They weren't reading the books, they were piling them. Great mounds of leather-bound history scrolls of philosophy and hololith crystals containing our entire musical heritage were being tossed into heaps in the center of the reading room. Men with flamers stood by the pilot lights of their weapons, hissing blue in the smoky haze. I saw a soldier pick up a volume of poetry, the Songs of the Golden Morning, and inspect it for a second. He didn't look at the words. He checked the binding to see if it would burn well. Then he threw it onto the pile. "Stop!" The word tore out of my throat before I could stop it. I scrambled over the debris, my robes torn, my hands bleeding. I ran towards the officer overseeing the purge. He was a stern man, with a scar running through his lip. He looked at me with absolute indifference. "That is the history of 6,000 years," I shouted, grabbing his arm. "You can't burn it. It's not a weapon. It's art." He looked at my hand on his sleeve, then back at my face. He didn't shout. He didn't get angry. He simply shoved me back with a force that sent me sprawling onto the marble floor. "It is unsanctioned text," he said. His voice was flat, bored even. "It deviates from the Imperial Creed. Therefore, it is trash." I scrambled to my knees. I saw a soldier throw the Pax Aurelia onto the stack. My life's work. The ink was still fresh. "Please," I begged. I was crying now, the tears cutting tracks through the soot on my face. "Read it first. Just read one page. It praises the Emperor." The officer signaled to the flamer unit. "It praises a false idol," he said. "It praises weakness. To keep it would be to infect the mind." He nodded. The soldier squeezed the trigger. A torrent of liquid fire roared out, bathing the mountain of books in orange hell. The heat hit me like a physical wall, singing my eyebrows and drying the tears on my cheeks instantly. I watched the leather curl and blacken. I watched the pages turn to ash. I could almost hear the voices of the authors screaming as they were consumed. The history of Aurelia Secundus wasn't just being destroyed, it was being erased. The fire roared, a hungry, crackling beast that ate the poetry and the logic and the hope. The officer watched the flames with a look of mild satisfaction. "Fire is the only purity," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "It leaves no room for doubt." I lay on the floor, the heat blistering my skin, and I realized the terrifying truth of their crusade. They didn't want our obedience. They wanted our absence. They wanted to make it so that we had never existed at all. I saw a single page float out of the fire, carried on a thermal updraft. It was charred at the edges, glowing with embers. I recognized the calligraphy. It was a verse about the beauty of forgiveness. It hovered in the air for a moment, a glowing ghost, before disintegrating into gray dust. The soldier near me stomped his boot on the ashes, grinding them into the floor. He looked at me, his face hidden behind his rebreather mask. "Move along, citizen," he grunted, "unless you want to join the pile." I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched the fire burn until the gold ink turned black, and the words of my ancestors became smoke that choked the very sky they had loved so much. The library was no longer a place of light. It was an oven, and we were the dough being burned to a crisp. The officer turned to his men. "Clear the statues next. Melt them down. We need the bronze for casings." I watched them attach melted charges to the busts of our philosophers. The men who had taught us that reason was the highest virtue. There was a dull thump, and the statues collapsed into molten slag. The sound was wet and heavy. It sounded like a body hitting the ground. I closed my eyes. I wished I had died in the bunker. To die is simple. To watch your soul being dismantled piece by piece by men who think they are doing a good deed, that is a special kind of hell. The fire crackled on. It was the only sound left in the world, a roaring, mindless applause for the end of history. They herded us back to the Grand Unity Square. It wasn't a request. The Imperial Guard prodded us with the butts of their laser guns, shouting commands in a dialect of low Gothic that sounded like barking dogs. We walked over the rubble of our own homes. The square, once the jewel of our city, was now a cratered wasteland. The bodies from the first massacre had been pushed into piles by bulldozers, heaps of colorful robes and broken limbs dusted with white lime. The smell was sweet and cloying. It stuck to the back of my throat. I tried to cover my nose, but a guard struck my hand down. "Witness," he hissed. "You will look at your sin. They made us kneel in the grit. Thousands of us. The survivors. The broken." We knelt before the dais where our governor had preached peace only yesterday. Now a new altar had been erected, a rough platform of black iron stained with grease. A chaplain of the Astarte stood upon it. He was a terrifying figure, his black armor adorned with bones and parchment purity seals that fluttered in the hot wind. His helmet was a skull, literally death facing us. He didn't use a microphone, yet his voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by the Vox grill in his gorget. It was a voice that vibrated in your teeth. "Citizens of a doomed world," he intoned. "You have looked into the abyss and called it light. You have taken the master of mankind and dressed him in the rags of a coward." He gestured with a crozius, a power maul topped with a golden eagle. "Behold the architect of your damnation." Two serfs dragged a figure onto the stage. At first I didn't recognize him. He was small, shriveled, wearing a torn undershirt stained with urine and blood. His hair, usually coiffed and perfumed, hung in greasy strings around his face. It was Pontifex Giraldus, our spiritual leader, the man who had told us that the Emperor loved our songs. He wasn't singing now. He was weeping. It was a high, thin sound, like a wounded animal. He couldn't even stand. The serfs threw him down on the iron deck, and he curled into a ball, shielding his face. A gasp went through the kneeling crowd. This was the man who had held the sun in his hands. This shivering, broken thing. The chaplain walked over to him. He didn't run. He walked with the heavy, inevitable tread of a glacier. He reached down and grabbed the Pontifex by the neck, lifting him one-handed into the air. Giraldus kicked his legs feebly, his eyes bulging. "Look at him," the chaplain roared. "Is this your shepherd? Is this the voice of the God Emperor?" He shook the old man like a rag doll. "He is weak, and because he is weak, he has made you weak. The Emperor is not a harpist. He is the sword in the darkness. He is the fire that burns the unclean." I watched Giraldus try to speak. I saw his lips move. He was begging. Not for us. He was begging for his own life. "Please," I lip-read. "I will do anything." My stomach twisted. It wasn't pity. It was disgust. A profound, hollow shame. We had worshipped this man's vision. We had built our entire culture around his soft lies. And now, seeing him dangle there leaking fluids in fear, I realized how fragile our paradise had been. It had been built on the whim of a man who couldn't even face his own death with dignity. The illusion didn't just crack, it evaporated. I felt a cold hatred rising in my chest. Not for the Space Marine, but for the Pontifex. For lying to us. For making us believe we were special. The chaplain didn't draw a weapon. He simply tightened his grip. We heard the snap. It was loud like a dry branch breaking in a quiet forest. The Pontifex went limp. The chaplain dropped the body. It hit the deck with a wet thud, no more significant than a sack of wet grain. "False idols fall," the chaplain said, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl. "Only the strong remain." He looked out at us, his red eye lenses glowing. "Your penance begins now. You will learn the true shape of the galaxy. It is not a garden, it is a trench." The crowd remained silent. There were no screams this time, no tears. We were past that. We were hollowed out. I looked at the body of the Pontifex lying twisted on the black iron. I felt nothing. The grief was gone. The fear was gone. There was just a vast, echoing emptiness where my soul used to be. The wind howled through the ruined spires of the city, whistling through the bullet holes. It sounded like a funeral dirge for a world that had never really existed. I lowered my head. The Golden Age was dead. The heavy lifting was about to begin, and I was just another pair of hands in the dark. They didn't kill us all. That would have been a waste. The Imperium hates waste almost as much as it hates heresy. They herded us into the vast open-air containment zones they had erected overnight in the shadow of the spaceport. It was a marvel of logistical cruelty. Miles of razor-wire floodlights that turned night into a blinding white noon, and the smell. It didn't smell like the library or the burning city. It smelled of aggressive chemical disinfectants, unwashed bodies, and ozone. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse that had been scrubbed clean, but still remembered the blood. We were stripped of our robes. The silk and velvet, the symbols of our station, were piled into incinerator chutes. We stood naked, shivering not from cold, but from a profound sense of violation. Without our clothes, we were just meat. Pale, soft meat waiting to be grated. The line moved with agonizing slowness. At the front, beneath a corrugated metal awning, sat the assessors. They were members of the administratum, men and women, with skin as gray as parchment, surrounded by floating servo skulls that scanned our retinas with green laser beams. They didn't look at our faces. They looked at the data scrolling on their screens. I watched the man in front of me. He was a famous sculptor. I had once written an essay on the delicate way he carved marble. He stepped up. The scanner hummed. Muscle density insufficient, the assessor droned. Calcification in joints. No combat utility. The sculptor opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to mention his awards. Category C, the assessor interrupted. A servitor stamped a red symbol on the man's chest. Thump. It was the sound of a heavy book closing. 2 guards grabbed him and dragged him towards the door, marked Reclamation. He didn't scream. He just looked confused. I stepped forward. The concrete was cold against my bare feet. The servo skull hovered inches from my face, its mechanical eye dilating with a soft whir. It felt like a gun pressed to my temple. I realized in that moment that I wanted to live. It was a primal, ugly desire. I didn't care about my dignity. I didn't care about the truth. I just wanted to breathe. Name, the assessor asked, not looking up. Valerius, I croaked. Then I stopped. Valerius the archivist would be sent to the reclamation door. Valerius the intellectual was useless here. Valerius repeated, making my voice harder, flatter. Data entry specialist. Literacy grade, high Gothic. WPM 100 from 40. I lied about my vocation. I reduced my life's passion to a clerical function. I offered myself as a tool. The assessor paused. He looked up for the first time. His eyes were roomy, magnified by thick lenses. He looked at my hands. Soft, he muttered. But we have a backlog of manifestos. He typed something onto his keypad. The sound of the keys clacking was louder than the distant wail of sirens. Category B-, administrative servitude. He nodded to the servitor. The machine stepped forward, its arm ending in a pneumatic needle gun. It didn't stamp me with ink. It pressed the cold metal against my forearm. There was a sharp, stinging buzz like a hornet trapped against the skin. I watched, as the ink was injected deep into the dermis. A barcode and a number. 8 Alpha. Valerius was gone. Move, the assessor said, already looking at the next person. I stumbled away, clutching my arm. It throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I was directed towards the processing gate. I looked back one last time at the reclamation door. It was a wide, dark maw. I could hear machinery grinding inside. Wet, heavy grinding. I knew what happened there. The weak, the old, the artists, they were being rendered down. Their water would be reclaimed. Their fats would be used for engine grease. Their bones would be ground into meal. It was efficient. It was logical. And I had survived because I had convinced them I was a machine, not a man. I sat in the holding pen with the others who had passed. We didn't speak. We didn't make eye contact. We sat with our knees pulled to our chests, rocking back and forth. We were the lucky ones. We were the useful ones. I looked at the barcode on my arm. The skin around it was red and angry. It was the only color on my body. I traced the lines with my finger. This was my new scripture. This was my new history. I wasn't a keeper of knowledge anymore. I was inventory. Asset 899 Alpha. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't block out the sound from the other room. The stamp, thump, the drag, thump, the silence, thump. The sound of a civilization being sorted into buckets. I didn't cry. Tears are moisture, and on a penal world, moisture is a resource you do not waste. They built the manufactorum on the bones of the gardens. It didn't take them long. The Imperium constructs industry with the same violence it wages war. Prefabricated plasteel walls were dropped from orbit, slamming into the earth, crushing the flower beds and the fountains. The sky, once visible and open, was sealed off by a vaulted ceiling of corrugated iron and smokestacks. I work in Sector 7G, formerly the site of the Academy of Fine Arts, where students once learned to paint light. I now learn to assemble death. The noise is absolute. It is a physical weight that presses down on your shoulders. It is the screaming of metal on metal, the hiss of hydraulic presses, and the constant rhythmic thumping of the stamping machines. Ka-chunk. Ka-chunk. It is the heartbeat of our new god. My station is a 3-foot span of conveyor belt. My task is simple. I inspect the propellant casings for heavy bolter rounds. I look for hairline fractures. If the casing is perfect, I press the green rune. If it is flawed, I press the red rune. I do this 14 hours a day. My hands, which once calligraphed the delicate curves of high Gothic script, are now permanently stained black with oil and graphite. The skin is cracked and bled, then healed into hard, insensitive leather. I don't feel the heat of the casings anymore. I don't feel the vibration of the floor. I have become a biological component of the assembly line, cheaper to maintain than a cogitator and easier to replace. The irony is not lost on me, though I try not to dwell on it. The ammunition I approve, the explosive-tipped mass-reactive shells, are the same type that tore my city apart. I am building the very instruments of my world's execution. Every time I press the green rune, I am sending a bullet out into the stars to kill someone else's father, someone else's child. In the beginning, I wept while I worked. I let the tears fall onto the conveyor belt, sizzling on the hot metal. Now, I don't weep. Dehydration is a punishable offense. The overseer's men with electric whips and vocal implants that amplify their shouts into barks walk the gantries above us. They don't see people. They see output quotas. Work is prayer, the loudspeakers chant. The voice loops every 3 minutes. Labor is the tribute of the faithful. Idleness is heresy. I repeat the words. I have to. It is the only thing that keeps the madness at bay. The rhythm of the work has invaded my mind. I no longer think in sentences or paragraphs. I think in cycles. Inspect, approve, inspect, reject. The complexity of my inner life has been filed down to a binary code. I remember the minister of culture, the woman who loved opera. I saw her 3 days ago in the mess hall. She was staring at her bowl of gray nutrient paste, drooling slightly. She didn't recognize me. She had found her peace in the machine. She had forgotten the music. Sometimes the belt stops, a jam further down the line. In those moments of sudden ringing silence, the horror rushes back in. I look at the rows of bent backs, the shaved heads, the barcodes on the arms. We are a legion of ghosts haunting a factory. I remember the smell of jasmine. It hits me with the force of a physical blow, a phantom scent from a dead world. But then the whistle blows. The gears grind. The belt jerks forward. The jasmine is gone, replaced by the smell of recycled sweat and ozone. I pick up the next casing. It is perfect. I press the green rune. I am helping. I am serving. I am erasing myself one bullet at a time. And there is a terrible, seductive comfort in that. They came for me during the night cycle. I thought it was for execution. When the stormtroopers drag you from your cot in the dark, you don't expect breakfast. They put a bag over my head. It smelled of burlap and old sweat. They marched me through corridors I didn't recognize. The floor changed from the vibrating metal grid of the factory to cold, solid stone. The noise of the machines faded, replaced by a silence that was thick and dripping. When they finally pulled the bag off, I wasn't in a cell. I was in a study. It was small, lit by a single lumen globe that hung from the ceiling like a glowing eye. There was a desk, a real desk made of wood, not plasteel, and sitting behind it was a man who looked too clean for this world. He was an inquisitor. I knew it by the rosette pin on his lapel, a crimson eye that seemed to catch the light and hold it. He wasn't wearing power armor. He wore a high-collared coat of black leather. He was peeling an apple with a silver knife, the skin of the fruit curled away in a perfect, continuous ribbon. He didn't look up when I entered. "Sit, Valerius," he said. His voice was soft. It had the cultured accent of the core worlds, a sharp contrast to the barking of the factory overseers. I sat on the wooden stool. My hand, stained black from the oil, shook on my knees. I felt dirty in his presence. I felt like a disease he was studying. "I have read your file," he said, slicing a piece of apple. Archivist, historian, a man of words. He finally looked at me. His eyes were gray, devoid of any warmth. They were the eyes of a surgeon looking for a tumor. "The Imperium has enough bullet loaders, Valerius. What we lack are storytellers." He pushed a piece of vellum across the desk. Beside it, he placed a fountain pen. It was a beautiful instrument, black lacquer with a gold nib. It looked exactly like the one I had used to write the Pax Aurelia. "The governor is dead," he continued. "The population is re-educated, but the future needs to understand why." I looked at the pen. It felt like a trap. I don't understand," I stammered. "You burned the history. You said it was heresy." The Inquisitor smiled. It was a thin, joyless expression. "We burned the lies, Valerius. Now you will write the truth." He leaned forward. "I want you to write a history of Aurelia Secundus, but not the one you wrote before. I want you to write about the corruption. I want you to write about how your peace was actually sloth, how your art was actually decadence, how your people were secretly inviting the demons in." "But that's not true," I whispered. "We were loyal. We just hated war." The Inquisitor stopped chewing. The room went very quiet. The only sound was the dripping of water somewhere in the darkness. "Truth," he said, pointing the silver knife at me, "is a variable. It is determined by the victor. If you write that you were innocent, then we are monsters for killing you. Do you think the Imperium is a monster, Valerius?" He waited. It wasn't a question. It was a cliff edge. No, I breathed. Good. Then you must have been guilty. Write it down. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy, heavier than the artillery shells I moved all day. I dipped it into the inkwell. The ink was black. I looked at the blank vellum. I thought of the Minister of Culture. I thought of the children playing in the fountain. I knew that if I wrote this, I was killing them a second time. I was murdering their memory. I was turning them into villains to justify their slaughter. But I looked at the Inquisitor's knife. I looked at the darkness beyond the door, and I was so tired. I was so afraid of the pain returning. I began to write. The tragedy of Aurelia. I wrote my handwriting shaky but legible was the tragedy of pride. I described our beautiful library as a den of sedition. I described our peaceful governor as a weak-willed heretic who turned away from the Emperor's light. I invented secret cults. I invented rituals that never happened. I poured filth onto the graves of my ancestors. The Inquisitor watched me nodding slowly. Every word I wrote was a betrayal. Every sentence was a nail in the coffin of my soul. I wrote for hours. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote until the lie was complete. When I finished, he took the paper. He read it over, humming a soft tune. "Excellent," he said. "This will be taught in the Scola. Children will read this and learn to hate what you were. They will learn that mercy is a weakness." He stood up and dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "You have served the throne today, Valerius. You may live." I walked back to the cell. I didn't feel relief. I felt a profound, bottomless shame. I had saved my body, but I had sold the last thing I owned. I had sold the truth. And as I lay in the dark, listening to the screams of the tortured, I realized that the Inquisitor was right. The truth doesn't matter. Only the story matters. And now the story belonged to them. I used to think death was the worst thing the Imperium could do to a human being. I was wrong. Death is a release. Death is the period at the end of a sentence. What happens in the bio-bays of the Adeptus Mechanicus is an endless run-on scream that has been silenced by a scalpel. I was sent there to deliver crates of sterilized gauze. I am a trusted worker, now a category B- with a talent for obedience. The bio-bay is not a hospital. There are no nurses holding hands, no anesthesia to dull the fear. It is a workshop. The air is frigid, kept at freezing temperatures, to slow the rate of infection and decomposition. It smells of rubbing alcohol cauterized meat and the metallic tang of fresh copper wiring. The floor is grated, so the fluids can drain away into the dark sumps below. I walked past rows of steel slabs. On each one lay a person. Some were strangers, rebels caught in the mountains. Others I knew. I saw the face of Julian, a man who used to teach astronomy at the university. He was strapped down with heavy leather belts. His skull had been opened. It looked like a cracked egg. A tech priest, a creature more bronze than biology, hovered over him. The priest's mechadendrites, long, snake-like mechanical arms, were working inside Julian's brain. They were snipping. Snip. Snip. They were cutting away the parts of him that dreamed of the stars. They were removing the frontal lobe, the seat of personality, of ego, of fear. In its place, they shoved a crude, blinking cogitator unit. Julian didn't scream. His vocal cords had already been severed to prevent distraction. I stopped at the end of the row. I couldn't help myself. I saw a woman I recognized. It was Alara. She had been a poet. She wrote sonnets about the way the light hit the ocean at sunset. Now she was naked, her skin pale and goose-fleshed in the cold. Her head was shaved. The tech priest was drilling into her temples. Whirr. The sound was high-pitched like a dentist's drill, but deeper, grinding against the bone. I watched as they threaded thick black cables into her sockets, replacing her eyes with red optical sensors. They were turning her into a mono-task unit, heavy lifting, hazard environment work. They were taking the soul of a poet and turning it into a forklift. The horror wasn't just in the gore, it was in the peace of it. When the procedure was finished, the tech priest recited a binary canticle and flipped a switch on the back of Alara's neck. Her body stiffened, then she sat up. She didn't look around in panic. She didn't ask where she was. The red sensors glowed with a dull, steady light. Unit 734 online, she said. Her voice was synthesized, flat, devoid of any inflection. It wasn't Alara anymore. Alara was gone. She had been evicted from her own flesh, and a machine had moved in. She swung her legs off the table and stood perfectly still, waiting for a command. She was perfect. She was the ideal citizen. She would never question. She would never rebel. She would never feel sad. I stood there clutching the crate of gauze, and I felt a surge of emotion that almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't revulsion. God, Emperor, help me. It was envy. I looked at the thing that used to be Alara, and I was jealous. She didn't have to remember the burning library. She didn't have to live with the shame of the lies I had written. She was free. The Imperium had taken everything from her, but in return, they had given her the ultimate gift: silence. Inside her head, there was no screaming. There was just code. 0 and 1. Task and completion. Move along, unit. The tech priest buzzed at me, mistaking my stillness for a glitch. I nodded and hurried away, my boots clanging on the grate. I delivered the gauze. I walked back to my dormitory. But the image of the empty red eyes stayed with me. I lay on my cot that night and touched my own temples. I imagined the drill. I imagined the cold steel entering my brain and scooping out the pain. I realized then that this is the true promise of the 41st millennium. They break you until you pray to become a machine. They hurt you until you beg to be hollow. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that if they offered me the chair, if they offered to cut away my memories, I would sit down and say thank you. Time is a flat circle of ash. 20 years have passed since the sky broke open, but in the hive there is no day or night. There are only work shifts and sleep cycles. Aurelia Secundus is gone. The name has been struck from the records. We are now designated Industrial Zone 44 Gamma. The marble towers have been ground down to make concrete for the manufactorums. The gardens have been paved over with asphalt. The air is so thick with smog that we haven't seen the sun in a decade. We breathe recycled fumes, tasting the metallic tang of industry with every inhalation. I am old now. My hair is gone, burned away by chemical leaks. My left leg is a mechanical strut, a crude replacement for the flesh lost to gangrene. I am no longer an archivist. I am a tutor in the Schola Progenium. My classroom is a windowless box of gray ferrocrete. 30 children sit before me in perfect rows. They are 6 years old, but they have the eyes of old men. They do not play. They do not laugh. They wear miniature versions of the factory coveralls stained with grease. They are the first generation born in the dark. They have never seen a bird. They have never touched a flower. To them, the stories of the Golden Age are not memories. They are myths of a wicked time. I stand at the lectern, my voice amplified by a voxhaler bolted to my throat. It hurts to speak, but pain is instructive. Repeat the third tenet of compliance, I rasp. The mind is a fortress, with its gates unbarred, the children chant in unison. Their voices are flat, stripped of all childish joy. To question is to open the gate to the enemy. To doubt is to invite the demon. I nod. It is a good answer. It is the answer I wrote for the Inquisitor all those years ago. I look at their faces, searching for a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of the people we used to be. There's nothing. Just a dull, terrifying acceptance. They believe that color is a sin. They believe that silence is suspicion. I am teaching them to hate their own ancestors. I am teaching them to spit on my own grave. A boy in the front row raises his hand. His number is 99 Delta. He is small, with pale skin that has never known vitamin D. Tutor, he asks, his voice trembling slightly. Is it true that before the liberation the people looked at the sky? The class gasps. It is a dangerous question. Looking up implies dreaming. Dreaming implies dissatisfaction with the lot the Emperor has assigned you. I grip the edges of the podium. I remember the blue sky. I remember the clouds that looked like ships. I want to tell him about the warmth of the sun on his face. I want to tell him that the sky was once a promise, not a ceiling of smoke. That is a lie, I say. My voice is steady. I don't hesitate. The sky has always been gray. The people before were foolish. They looked up because they were lazy. They did not want to work. They wanted the stars to give them gifts. I lean forward, the servos in my neck whining. The stars give nothing. 99 Delta. Only the Emperor gives. And he gives us the privilege of labor. The boy nods ashamed. He looks down at his desk. I'm sorry, Tutor. I will work harder. I feel a cold stone settle in my gut. I have crushed the question. I have saved him. If he keeps looking up, the commissar will take him. I have bought him a life of slavery, but at least it is a life. The bell rings. It is a harsh klaxon shriek. The shift is over. The children stand up, march to the door, and file out in perfect step. Left, right, left, right. They do not run. They do not talk. They head straight to the assembly lines to clean the gears of the machines their parents operate. I stand alone in the empty room. I look at the blackboard. I have written the word obedience in large block letters. I pick up the eraser. I wipe it away. Chalk dust floats in the air, swirling in the draft from the ventilation fans. It looks like the ash from the library. It always comes back to the ash. I gather my data slates. The war is over. The Imperium won. And the greatest victory was not destroying our cities, but destroying our imagination. We no longer dream of golden lights. We only dream of quotas. The end comes quietly. It usually does for people like me. I am not dying on a battlefield. I am not dying on a torture rack. I am dying in a storage alcove behind the ventilation ducts of the old library ruins. I crawled here 3 days ago when my augmetic leg seized up and my heart began to flutter like a trapped moth. I didn't report to the medici. There is no point. I am expired inventory. I sit with my back against the cold stone, wrapped in a stolen blanket. The darkness here is absolute, but it is a soft darkness. It is the only place in the hive where the noise of the machines is muffled. It sounds distant, like the ocean we used to have. I reach into the hollow of my chest beneath the layers of scarred skin and wires. I pull out a small folded piece of paper. I have carried it for 20 years. It is brittle, yellowed, and fraying at the edges. I unfold it with trembling fingers. It is not a manifesto. It is not a confession. It is a poem. A stanza I memorized from a book they burned. The light does not judge the glass it shines through. It simply makes it beautiful. I can't read it in the dark, but I know the shape of the letters. I trace them with my thumb. This is my rebellion. A single scrap of beauty in a galaxy of iron. My breathing is shallow now. The fluid is filling my lungs. It feels like drowning, but I'm not afraid. I'm tired. So incredibly tired. I think about the Inquisitor. I think about the Space Marine who killed the statue. I wonder if they are happy. I wonder if their hate keeps them warm at night. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy. I only feel pity. They own the stars, but they have forgotten how to look at them. They are the masters of the galaxy, and they live in a prison of their own making. I am the free one. I am leaving. I close my fingers around the paper. I shove it deep into a crack in the wall behind a loose stone. It is a small thing, a meaningless thing. But maybe 1,000 years from now, when this hive crumbles and the sun breaks through, again, someone will find it. Someone will read it and know that we were here. We were not just heretics. We were not just numbers. We were people who loved the light. That has to be enough. The pain in my chest fades. A numbness spreads from my extremities. The darkness of the alcove seems to brighten. I see it. I see the gold. It is spilling over the edges of my vision, warm and liquid. I smell jasmine. I hear the artificial birds singing their clockwork song. The library is whole again. The marble is white. The silence is not heavy. It is expectant. I see the governor. I see Ilara. They are smiling. They are waiting for me. I close my eyes. My heart beats. Once. Twice. And then it stops. The machine noise fades away. The war continues. It always does. But I am no longer part of it. I am static. I am memory. And finally, after 20 years of noise, I have found the silence.